Victoria Reynolds froze as the desperate janitor blocked her car door, his eyes blazing with a truth that would shatter her perfect world. "Take my son for one day," she finally agreed, never imagining how his one simple condition would reduce her, the untouchable CEO of Reynolds Enterprises, to tears. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Ma'am, don't get in the car." The words tore through the crisp afternoon air, raw and desperate. Victoria Reynolds froze, one hand on the polished chrome handle of her sedan, her vision of the world momentarily fractured. The city's hum, the distant sirens, the murmur of traffic all seemed to fall away, leaving only that ragged, terrified voice. Two men in dark suits, members of her security detail, moved as one, converging on the source. A man in a grey janitor's uniform, his face pale with determination. "Stay back," one of the guards commanded, his voice a low growl. He placed himself squarely between Victoria and the janitor, his body a solid wall. The other guard grabbed the janitor, spinning him around. "Please, Miss Reynolds, just 5 minutes of your time," the janitor pleaded, his eyes fixed on Victoria. "It's about your son." Victoria's shock curdled into icy irritation. She was already running late for a meeting that could not be rescheduled. This was an unacceptable breach. "Graves," she demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "What is the meaning of this? Who is this man?" "Thomas Reeves, ma'am," Graves said, his eyes scanning the surroundings. "He's on the maintenance crew, night shift. Thomas Reeves." The name registered dimly in Victoria's mind. She'd seen him around the building, pushing his cleaning cart, nodding respectfully whenever they passed. Unremarkable, invisible, until now. "I need to speak with you," Thomas insisted, his voice steadier now. "About Lucas, please." The mention of her son's name struck Victoria like a physical blow. Lucas, her 8-year-old boy, currently being cared for by a rotation of nannies while she worked 16-hour days, building Reynolds Enterprises into the corporate giant it had become. "Release him," she ordered the guards, her curiosity overcoming her irritation. "Mr. Reeves, you have exactly 2 minutes to explain yourself before I have you escorted from the property and terminated." The guards reluctantly let go of Thomas, who straightened his uniform with shaking hand. "Thank you, Ms. Reynolds," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been working at Reynolds Tower for 3 years now. I clean the executive floor most nights. I've seen Lucas there many times, waiting in your office while you finish meetings." Victoria's jaw tightened. Yes, Lucas often spent evenings in her office, doing homework or playing quietly with his tablet while she wrapped up her day. "What business was it of this janitor? I have a daughter about his age," Thomas continued, "and I couldn't help but notice Lucas seems lonely." A flicker of anger sparked in Victoria's chest. "You've been watching my son." "Not like that," Thomas rushed to explain. "I have a little boy of my own, was raising him alone until," his voice faltered, "until I lost him last year. Cancer. He was 7. The anger in Victoria's chest dimmed, replaced by something uncomfortable. Pity, perhaps. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. Reeves, but I fail to see what this has to do with Lucas." Thomas took a deep breath. "Yesterday, I found him crying in the bathroom on the executive floor. He tried to hide it, but I could tell. He said it was his birthday and you'd promised to take him to the Science Museum, but something came up." Victoria felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. Lucas's birthday, the museum, the emergency board meeting that couldn't wait. She'd promised to make it up to him. Again, "Mr. Reeves, while I appreciate your concern, my family matters are private." "Please," Thomas said, his voice cracking, "let me take Lucas for just one day, to the Science Museum, the park, wherever he wants. I've seen how his eyes light up when he talks about dinosaurs and robots. My son Michael was the same way." Victoria stared at the man, bewildered by his audacity. "And do you want me to entrust my son to a janitor I barely know?" "I was a teacher before," Thomas said quietly. "Before Michael got sick and the medical bills piled up. I have references, a clean record. His voice broke. "I miss being around children, and Lucas needs someone who has time for him right now." The brutal honesty of his words struck her like a slap. Victoria looked at her watch, at the waiting car, at the endless stream of commitments that filled her days and left so little for her son. "This is absurd," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "One condition," Thomas said, surprising her. "If I take Lucas for the day, you have to promise to be there when I bring him back. No meetings, no calls, just you, waiting for your son, ready to hear about his day." Victoria felt a surge of indignation. "You're dictating terms to me now." "Not terms, Miss Reynolds, just a reminder of what matters." She should have had him removed immediately, should have walked away, gotten in her car, and proceeded with her meticulously planned day. Instead, Victoria Reynolds, CEO of Reynolds Enterprises, found herself considering the janitor's proposal. "Why?" she finally asked. "Why do you care so much about my son?" Thomas looked down at his worn shoes, then back up at her, his eyes filled with a grief so raw it made her flint. "Because every child deserves to be someone's priority," he said simply, "and because helping Lucas might help me too." Victoria's throat tightened unexpectedly. She thought of Lucas's birthday, of the disappointment in his eyes when she'd called to cancel their museum trip, of how quiet he'd become lately. "One day," she said, the words leaving her mouth before she'd fully decided to speak them. "If Lucas agrees, and if your background check is immaculate, and I'll be calling you every hour." Thomas's face transformed, a cautious hope spreading across his features. "Thank you, Ms. Reynolds. You won't regret this." "I already do," she muttered, but there was no bite to her words. As Victoria finally slid into her car, she was surprised to find her vision blurred by unshed tears. She blinked them away furiously, refusing to acknowledge the emotion that had ambushed her. A janitor had just made the CEO of Reynolds Enterprises confront the one failure she couldn't solve with money or power: her growing distance from her only child. The car pulled away from the curb, and Victoria stared out the window, unseeing. For the first time in years, her thoughts weren't on quarterly projections or market expansions. They were on a little boy who wanted to see dinosaurs on his birthday, and on all the promises she had failed to keep. The call from HR confirming Thomas Reeves' background check came during Victoria's board meeting. She excused herself to take it, earning raised eyebrows from the executives around the mahogany table. "Everything checks out, Miss Reynolds," the HR director reported. Mr. Reeves was indeed a fifth-grade science teacher for 8 years before resigning to care for his son. His references are impeccable. No criminal history, not even a parking ticket. Victoria felt an odd mixture of relief and disappointment. Part of her had hoped for a reason to cancel this unusual arrangement. "And his son?" she asked quietly, stepping further away from the boardroom. "Michael Reeves, age 7, passed away 14 months ago from leukemia. Mr. Reeves sold his home to cover the medical bills and took the night janitorial position 6 months later." Victoria closed her eyes, a wave of unexpected emotion washing over her. "Thank you, Miranda. That will be all." She ended the call and stood motionless in the hallway. The man had lost everything: his career, his child, his home, yet still found it in himself to care about a stranger's son. The weight of shame settled more firmly on her shoulders. That evening, Victoria arrived home earlier than usual, her driver's surprised expression not lost on her. The Reynolds penthouse was silent as she entered, the kind of pristine quiet that spoke of absence rather than peace. "Lucas," she called, setting down her briefcase. A moment later, Elena, Lucas's current nanny, appeared from the direction of the kitchen. "Miss Reynolds, we weren't expecting you until 9. Where is my son?" "In his room, working on a school project." "He's had dinner already?" Victoria nodded and made her way down the hallway to Lucas's bedroom. She paused outside his door, suddenly uncertain. When had she last entered his room? When had they last had a conversation that wasn't hurried or perfunctory? She knocked gently. "Come in," came the small voice from inside. Lucas was sitting at his desk, surrounded by construction paper and markers. He looked up when she entered, his expression shifting from concentration to surprise. "Mom? Is something wrong?" The question stung. Was her presence in his room so unusual that it signaled trouble? "Nothing's wrong," she said, smiling as she moved to sit on the edge of his bed. "I just wanted to talk to you." Lucas put down his marker, his posture wary. "About what?" Victoria took a deep breath. "About your birthday. I'm sorry I missed our museum trip." "It's okay," he said automatically, his eyes dropping to his hands. "You were busy." "It's not okay," Victoria replied, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "I made a promise, and I broke it." Lucas looked up, his eyes widening slightly. "I've been thinking," Victoria continued, choosing her words carefully. "There's someone who works in my building who has offered to take you to the Science Museum tomorrow, if you'd like." "Instead of Elena?" Lucas asked, confusion evident in his voice. "Yes, his name is Mr. Reeves. He used to be a science teacher, and he knows a lot about dinosaurs and robots." Lucas's eyes lit up at the mention of dinosaurs, but caution quickly returned. "Why can't you take me?" The question landed like a blow. Victoria forced herself to maintain eye contact with her son. "I have meetings I can't reschedule tomorrow, but I promise I'll be here when you get back, and you can tell me everything you saw." Lucas studied her face, his expression far too serious for an 8-year-old. "You promise? For real this time?" Victoria swallowed hard. "But for real this time." The next morning, Victoria found herself in the unusual position of being in her kitchen at 8 a.m., dressed casually in jeans and a sweater rather than her usual power suit. Lucas sat at the breakfast bar, picking at his cereal, occasionally glancing at the clock. The doorbell rang precisely at 8:30. Victoria smoothed her hands over her jeans and went to answer it. Thomas Reeves stood in the hallway, looking remarkably different in khaki pants and a blue button-down shirt, a small backpack slung over one shoulder. Without the janitor's uniform, he looked more like the teacher he once was. "Ms. Reynolds," he greeted her with a nod. "Thank you for this opportunity." She stepped back to let him in, noticing how his eyes immediately sought out Lucas at the breakfast bar. The boy was watching them curiously. "Lucas, this is Mr. Reeves," Victoria said, gesturing between them. "Mr. Reeves, my son Lucas." Thomas approached with a warm smile. "It's nice to meet you officially, Lucas. Your mum tells me you're interested in dinosaurs." Lucas nodded cautiously. "The carnivores are the coolest. I've always been partial to the ankylosaurs myself," Thomas replied, "like tanks with tails." Lucas's eyes brightened. "They had clubs on their tails that could break a T-Rex's leg." "Exactly," Thomas grinned, then reached into his backpack. "I brought something for you, if that's okay." He pulled out a small, worn book and handed it to Lucas. "This was my son Michael's favorite dinosaur encyclopedia. I thought you might like to use it today to see which exhibits you want to visit first." Lucas accepted the book with reverent hands, opening it to find pages filled with colorful illustrations and handwritten notes in the margins. "Cool," he whispered, already flipping through the pages. Victoria watched the interaction with a strange tightness in her chest. This man, this virtual stranger, had connected with her son in 30 seconds flat. "Here's my cell number," she said, handing Thomas a card. "Please call if there's any issue at all. I'll expect you back by 5. "We'll be here," Thomas promised. He turned to Lucas. "Ready for an adventure, buddy?" Lucas nodded, sliding off the stool and carefully placing the book in his own backpack. He hesitated for a moment, then gave Victoria a quick, awkward hug. Bye, Mom. Have fun," she managed, her voice unexpectedly hoarse. "I'll be waiting right here when you get back." As the door closed behind them, Victoria found herself alone in her penthouse on a Saturday morning with no meetings, no calls, and nowhere to be. The silence felt oppressive now. She wandered into Lucas's room, looking at it with new eyes. Model spaceships hung from the ceiling. Books lined the shelves, many still with price tags, gifts from her that he'd never mentioned reading. On his desk sat the project he'd been working on, a diorama of a dinosaur habitat, meticulously crafted but unfinished. She picked up one of the small dinosaur figures, turning it over in her hand. How much of her son's life had she missed while building her empire? How many conversations had they never had? Victoria's phone buzzed with a text message from her assistant. Board members asking if emergency meeting still necessary for tomorrow morning? She stared at the message for a long moment, then typed a reply that would have been unthinkable 24 hours ago. Cancel it. Reschedule for Monday afternoon. Setting her phone down, Victoria picked up a dinosaur figure and the tube of glue on Lucas's desk. If she was going to hear about his day when he returned, she should at least know what a stegosaurus was. Thomas and Lucas stood before the massive Tyrannosaurus Rex skeleton at the center of the museum's dinosaur hall. The boy's head was tilted all the way back, his mouth slightly open in wonder. "He's even bigger than in the pictures," Lucas whispered. Thomas smiled, remembering Michael's identical expression the first time he'd seen this exhibit. "Did you know they've found T-Rex teeth that are over a foot long?" "Really?" Lucas's eyes widened. "That's like the size of my whole arm." "Pretty close," Thomas agreed, kneeling down to Lucas's level and pointing upward. "See how the jaw hinges? That gave it one of the most powerful bites of any animal that ever lived." Lucas nodded eagerly, then glanced at Thomas with hesitation. "Can I ask you something, Mr. Reeves?" "Of course. How come you know so much about dinosaurs?" Thomas felt the familiar tightening in his chest whenever something reminded him of Michael, but he kept his smile steady. "I taught 5th grade science for a long time, but mostly my son was obsessed with them. We read every book and visited every museum exhibit we could find." Lucas studied him carefully. "My mom said you had a son. Where is he now?" The directness of children never ceased to amaze Thomas. He took a deep breath before answering. "Michael got very sick, and he died last year. He was about your age." Lucas's face fell. "I'm sorry." "Thank you," Thomas said softly. "He would have liked you. You both love the same things." Lucas looked down at the worn dinosaur book he was still carrying. "Is that why you wanted to bring me here? Because you miss him?" The question cut straight to Thomas's heart. He considered deflecting, but decided Lucas deserved honesty. "Partly," he admitted, "but also because when I saw you at the office building, you reminded me that all kids should get to do fun things like this, not just sit in offices waiting for grown-ups." Lucas nodded solemnly. "Mom's always busy. She says it's because she has to work hard to give me a good life." "Your mom has a very important job," Thomas acknowledged, "but sometimes grown-ups forget that being there is just as important as providing things." "Did you forget sometimes too?" The question was innocent, but it landed like a punch. Thomas thought of all the times he'd been grading papers when Michael wanted to play, of the school events he'd organized for other people's children while hiring babysitters for his own. "Yes," he said finally, "I did. And then, when Michael got sick, I realized how precious our time together was." Lucas seemed to consider this, then pointed to the next exhibit. "Can we see the velociraptors now?" "Absolutely." Thomas smiled, grateful for the change in subject. "Did you know that real velociraptors were much smaller than the ones in the movies?" As they moved through the museum, Thomas was struck by how easily conversation flowed with Lucas. The boy was bright and curious, asking thoughtful questions and sharing facts he already knew. But Thomas also noticed the moments of uncertainty, the way Lucas sometimes seemed surprised when Thomas truly listened to him, or answered his questions without hurrying. By lunchtime, they had covered most of the dinosaur exhibits and were sitting in the museum cafe with sandwiches and juice boxes. "What else do you like besides dinosaurs?" Thomas asked, watching Lucas methodically cut his sandwich into quarters. "Robots," Lucas replied immediately. "And in space, I have a telescope, but I can't use it much because you can't see many stars from our apartment." "Light pollution," Thomas nodded. "It's hard in the city. Mom said maybe we could go to the countryside someday to see the stars better, but she's always too busy." There it was again, the casual mention of absence, stated as simple fact rather than complaint. Thomas felt a familiar anger stirring, the same he'd felt when he'd found Lucas crying in the bathroom on his birthday. But he reminded himself that his role today wasn't to judge Victoria Reynolds. "What about your dad?" Thomas asked carefully. "Does he take you stargazing?" Lucas shook his head. "He lives in London now. He has a new family there. I see him at Christmas and for 2 weeks in summer." "I see," Thomas said, his heart aching for this boy whose parents were physically or emotionally absent. "Well, the robotics exhibit opens at 1. Should we head there after lunch?" Lucas's face brightened. "Yes, please. The robotics exhibit was interactive, allowing visitors to program simple commands for small robots. Lucas proved to be remarkably adept, quickly moving beyond the basic instructions to create complex sequences of movements. "You're really good at this," Thomas observed, genuinely impressed. Lucas shrugged. "I do coding games on my tablet a lot when I'm waiting for Mom." Another casual revelation that spoke volumes. Thomas watched as Lucas focused intently on the robot's control panel, his small fingers confident on the touchscreen. Here was a child who had learned to entertain himself, to find depth in solitary pursuits, because solitude was his primary state. Thomas's phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. "How is everything going?" It was the fourth check-in since they'd left that morning. Thomas quickly typed a response. "Great. We've seen the dinosaurs and now at the robotics exhibit. Lucas is showing real talent for programming." The reply came almost immediately. "He does. I didn't know he was interested in programming." Thomas felt a twinge of sadness at her surprise. How much didn't she know about her own son? "Mr. Reeves, look," Lucas called, drawing Thomas's attention back to the small robot, which was now executing a perfect figure-8 pattern on the table. "I made it dance." "That's amazing, Lucas." Thomas pocketed his phone and joined the boy at the exhibit. "How did you figure that out?" As Lucas excitedly explained his process, Thomas noticed something he hadn't seen before: confidence. The shy, cautious boy from this morning was gradually being replaced by an enthusiastic, engaging child. All it had taken was a few hours of undivided attention. By 4 o'clock, they had explored most of the museum. Lucas's energy was finally beginning to wane, his steps slowing as they made their way toward the exit. "Under one last stop," Thomas suggested, steering them toward the museum gift shop. "I'd like to get you something to remember today, if that's okay." Lucas's eyes widened. "Really? Like what?" "Your choice. Something special." As Lucas wandered the shop, Thomas watched him carefully consider each item, not grabbing greedily or asking for everything in sight, but thoughtfully examining his options. Finally, he returned with a small build-it-yourself robot kit. "Is this okay?" he asked tentatively. "It's not too expensive." "It's perfect," Thomas assured him, taking the box. "And maybe someday you can show me how it works when you built it." Lucas looked up with a hopeful expression. "Does that mean we can do this again?" The question caught Thomas off guard. He hadn't thought beyond today, hadn't considered what might come next. The truth was, being with Lucas had been both healing and painful. A bittersweet reminder of what he'd lost with Michael. But looking into those expectant eyes, Thomas couldn't bring himself to close that door. "If your mum agrees, I'd like that very much," he said carefully. As they rode the taxi back to the Reynolds penthouse, Lucas grew quieter, the excitement of the day giving way to fatigue and perhaps apprehension about returning home. Thomas felt it too, a strange reluctance to end their time together. "Your mum will be waiting for you," Thomas reminded him gently. "She wants to hear all about what you saw today." Lucas nodded, but his expression was guarded. "She says that sometimes, but then she gets calls or has to check her email." Thomas chose his next words carefully. "I think today might be different. Sometimes people need a little reminder about what's important." The taxi pulled up to the luxury high-rise where the Reynolds family lived. As they rode the elevator to the penthouse floor, Lucas clutched his new robot kit and the dinosaur book, suddenly looking very small in the cavernous mirrored space. "Thank you for coming with me today, Mr. Reeves," he said formally, as if practicing adult courtesy. Thomas placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "It was my pleasure, Lucas, truly." The elevator doors opened to reveal Victoria Reynolds waiting in the hallway, her casual clothes a stark contrast to her usual corporate armor. Her eyes immediately found her son, a mixture of relief and uncertainty in her expression. "Mom!" Lucas's reserved greeting belied the excitement dancing in his eyes as he stepped off the elevator. Victoria knelt down to his level, an awkward motion for a woman more accustomed to board meetings than displays of maternal affection. "Welcome home, sweetheart. Did you have a good time?" Lucas nodded, cautiously at first, then with increasing enthusiasm. "We saw everything. The T-Rex was huge, and I programmed a robot to dance. And Mr. Reeves knows all about dinosaurs because he used to be a teacher and..." He stopped abruptly, seemingly surprised by his own outburst. Victoria's eyes flicked to Thomas, who stood a respectful distance behind Lucas. Something unspoken passed between the adults, a recognition that this animated child was revealing a side of himself rarely seen at home. "Why don't we go inside?" Victoria suggested, rising to her feet. "You can tell me all about it." The Reynolds penthouse was a study in minimalist luxury, open spaces, neutral colors, and carefully curated art pieces. Nothing out of place, nothing unnecessary. Thomas felt immediately out of his element. "Would you like something to drink, Mr. Reeves?" Victoria offered as they entered. "Coffee? Water?" "Water would be fine, thank you," Thomas replied, taking in the spectacular city views from the floor-to-ceiling windows. Lucas had already dropped his backpack on the pristine white sofa and was carefully removing his new robot kit. "Mom, look what Mr. Reeves got me. Can we build it together?" Victoria's expression flickered with uncertainty. "Of course, but maybe later. First, I want to hear about your day." To Thomas's surprise, Victoria settled on the floor beside the coffee table, patting the space next to her for Lucas to join. The boy looked equally surprised, but quickly sat down, placing his treasures on the table. "Mr. Reeves gave me this book too," Lucas explained, opening the worn dinosaur encyclopedia. It was his son's. "See all the notes in it. Michael wrote them." Victoria glanced up at Thomas, who was still standing awkwardly by the entrance. "Please, sit down," she said, gesturing to an armchair. Thomas took a seat, accepting the glass of water a housekeeper silently delivered. He watched as Lucas began recounting their day in detail, the exhibits they'd seen, the facts he'd learned, the interactions they'd had. Victoria listened with an intensity that surprised Thomas. She wasn't just going through the motions, she was genuinely absorbing every word, asking follow-up questions, leaning in when Lucas showed her something in the book. And Mr. Reeves said real velociraptors were way smaller than in the movies, and they probably had feathers, like birds. "Is that right?" Victoria smiled, shooting a quick glance at Thomas. "It's the current scientific consensus," Thomas confirmed. "The movies took some creative liberties," Lucas continued his enthusiastic recap, occasionally jumping topics as new memories surfaced. Throughout it all, Victoria maintained her focus on her son, ignoring the phone that buzzed several times in her pocket. Thomas found himself studying the CEO in this unfamiliar context. The sharp edges that defined her professional persona had softened. The woman kneeling on her living room floor, genuinely laughing at her son's impression of a triceratops, seemed miles away from the intimidating executive who had initially rejected his plea in front of Reynolds Tower. "And then, at the robotics exhibit, I made a robot dance," Lucas was saying, his hands animatedly demonstrating the movement pattern. "Mr. Reeves said I was really good at programming." "He did?" Victoria looked over at Thomas again. Thomas nodded. "Lucas has a natural aptitude for it. He understood the logic immediately and was creating complex sequences that stumped some of the adults." Victoria's expression shifted subtly. "I didn't realize you were interested in programming, Lucas." The boy shrugged. "I play coding games on my tablet a lot when I'm waiting for you." The simple statement landed with the weight of an accusation, though Lucas hadn't meant it that way. Victoria's smile faltered for just a moment. "Well," she recovered quickly, "maybe we should look into some coding classes for you. Would you like that?" Lucas's eyes widened. "Really? Like actual classes with other kids?" "Of course," Victoria said. "If that's something you're passionate about, we should nurture it." Thomas watched the interaction with mixed emotions. On one hand, Victoria was clearly making an effort. On the other, the conversation highlighted how little she knew about her son's interests and abilities. "Mom, can I show you something else?" Lucas asked. Suddenly remembering, he dug into his pocket and pulled out a small, smooth stone with flecks of gold embedded in it. They had a mineral exhibit too, and Mr. Reeves let me pick out a stone from the gift shop activity. It's pyrite, fool's gold. Victoria took the stone, examining it carefully. "It's beautiful." "Mr. Reeves said sometimes the most valuable things aren't what they first appear to be," Lucas recited, clearly quoting Thomas from earlier. "He said sometimes we miss what's really important because we're looking for something else." Victoria's eyes snapped up to meet Thomas's, a flicker of understanding or perhaps recognition passing between them. "Your Mr. Reeves sounds very wise," she said quietly. "He's not my Mr. Reeves," Lucas corrected her. He's Michael's dad. The innocent comment hung in the air, heavy with implication. Thomas felt his throat tighten. Victoria cleared her throat softly. Lucas, why don't you take your robot kit to your room? You can start sorting the pieces while I talk to Mr. Reeves for a few minutes. Lucas hesitated, looking between the adults. Are you going to be mad at him? No, sweetheart, Victoria assured him. I just want to thank him properly for giving you such a wonderful day. Seemingly satisfied, Lucas gathered his treasures and headed down the hallway, stopping briefly to give Thomas an awkward but sincere half-hug. Thank you for today, Mr. Reeves. It was my pleasure, Lucas, Thomas replied, his voice thick with emotion. When Lucas had disappeared into his room, Victoria rose from the floor, smoothing her casual clothes with the same precision she would a business suit. Would you prefer something stronger than water? She offered, moving to a sleek bar cart near the windows. No, thank you, Thomas declined. I should be going soon. Victoria poured herself a small measure of amber liquid before turning to face him. My son hasn't talked that much in months, she said simply. Possibly years. Thomas nodded, unsure how to respond. I don't know whether to thank you or resent you for making that so painfully clear, she continued, a hint of her corporate directness returning. I didn't bring him here to make a point, Ms. Reynolds, Thomas said quietly. I just wanted to give him a day he'd remember. And your condition, she challenged, that I be here when you returned. That was just coincidence. Thomas met her gaze evenly. No, that was deliberate. Victoria took a small sip of her drink. Why? What do you gain from this? It was the question of a businesswoman, always looking for the angle, the hidden motivation, the underlying transaction. Not everything is about gain, Miss Reynolds, Thomas replied. Sometimes it's about giving back what was taken from you. And what was taken from you? She asked, though they both knew the answer. Time, Thomas said simply. Time I can never get back. Victoria turned away from Thomas, moving to the windows that showcased the city sprawled beneath them, a kingdom she had conquered through relentless ambition and sacrifice. In the reflection of the glass, she could see herself successful, powerful, respected, and alone, despite her son being just down the hall. You think I'm a terrible mother, she said, the words more statement than question. Thomas remained seated, his hands resting on his knees. No, I don't. I think you're someone who's forgotten that time isn't infinite. She turned back to face him, her businesswoman's composure briefly cracking. Do you know what it took for me to get here? The sacrifices I made, the barriers I broke. I can imagine. No, you can't, Victoria cut him off. Reynolds Enterprises was a mid-sized company when my father died. The board didn't want a 30-year-old woman taking over. They tried to force me out, to sell my shares, to marginalize me at every turn. Her voice hardened with the memory. I fought for years to prove myself, to build something that would last, something I could leave to Lucas. Thomas nodded, acknowledging her struggle. And you've succeeded. But at what cost? Victoria bristled. Don't presume to judge my choices, Mr. Reeves. You don't know what it's like to feel responsible for a child's future, Thomas interrupted gently. To worry every day about whether you're making the right decision. To lie awake at night, wondering if you've done enough. He shook his head. I may not know what it's like to run a billion-dollar company, Ms. Reynolds, but I know what it's like to be a parent. The words hung between them, a bridge spanning their different worlds. Victoria took another sip of her drink, then set it down untouched. And when Lucas's father left, she said quietly, he told me I would never be able to balance motherhood and running the company, that eventually I would have to choose. Her jaw tightened. I refused to accept that. I was determined to prove him wrong. And instead, I've proven him right, Victoria admitted, the words clearly painful to speak aloud. I've been so focused on building Lucas's future that I've missed his present. Thomas thought of his own regrets, the times he'd prioritized his career over moments with Michael that he could never reclaim. It's not too late, he said. Lucas is still young. Is he? Victoria's voice was barely audible. Sometimes when I look at him, I see a little adult, so self-sufficient, so resigned. Thomas recognized the description. It was exactly how Lucas had appeared when they first met that morning. A child who had learned not to expect too much, not to need too much. It had taken hours at the museum for the real boy to emerge from that careful shell. Children are resilient, Thomas said. They adapt to what they're given. but they never stop hoping for more. Victoria's gaze drifted toward the hallway where Lucas had disappeared. And when I was growing up, my father was never home. He was always working, building the company. I swore I would be different with my own children. She laughed, a hollow sound. And here I am, repeating the same pattern. Awareness is the first step to change, Thomas offered. Victoria looked at him with sudden sharpness. Is that why you did this? To make me aware. I did this because a little boy was crying on his birthday, Thomas replied honestly. And because spending time with him helped me too. Victoria studied him, her analytical mind reasserting itself. Your son, Michael, you said he died of cancer. Thomas nodded, the familiar ache blooming in his chest. Leukemia. We fought it for 3 years. I'm sorry, Victoria said, and Thomas could tell she meant it. That must have been unimaginable. The hardest part wasn't losing him, Thomas confessed, his voice low. It was the regret. All the times I said, later, or tomorrow, or next weekend. All the moments I missed because I thought there would always be more time. Victoria's breath caught audibly. She turned back to the window, but not before Thomas saw the glimmer of tears in her eyes. I don't say this to make you feel guilty, he continued carefully, but to tell you what I wish someone had told me. The work will always be there. The moments won't. A silence fell between them, not uncomfortable, but weighted with understanding. In the distance, they could hear Lucas moving around in his room, the soft clatter of robot parts being organized. He wants to build that robot with you, Thomas said after a moment. Not with Elena, not with me, with you. Victoria nodded, still facing the window. When she finally turned around, her eyes were dry but reddened. Thank you for today, Mr. Reeves. For everything. Thomas recognized a dismissal when he heard one. He stood, gathering his backpack. It was my pleasure. Lucas is a remarkable boy. As he moved toward the elevator, Victoria called after him. Mr. Reed. He paused, turning back. Would you? She hesitated, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. Would you be willing to do this again? The question surprised him. Take Lucas out. Yes, Victoria said. Not regularly, but occasionally. He clearly connected with you. And I think, she paused, choosing her words carefully, I think it might be good for both of you. Thomas considered the offer. Part of him wanted to say no, to protect himself from the bittersweet pain of being reminded of Michael, but a larger part recognized the healing that had begun today. Not just for Lucas, but for himself as well. I would like that, he said finally. But only if you make an effort to be more present in his life. I won't be a substitute for his mother. Victoria straightened, CEO mode briefly reasserting itself at his directness. But then she nodded. That's fair. I'm planning to make some changes. Words are easy, Thomas said. Actions are what count. Indeed they are, Mr. Reeves, Victoria replied, which is why I've already rescheduled tomorrow's board meeting and asked Elena to take the day off. Lucas and I are going to build that robot together and then maybe visit the planetarium. Thomas couldn't hide his surprise. That's a good start. It's just a start, Victoria agreed, but it's something. As the elevator doors opened, Thomas had one more question. May I ask you something, Miss Reynolds? Victoria, she corrected him. I think we're past formalities. Victoria, he amended. Why did you agree to let me take Lucas today? You could have had me fired on the spot for even suggesting it. Victoria considered the question. And because you were right, she said simply. When you said every child deserves to be someone's priority, it made me realize Lucas hadn't been mine for a long time. Her voice softened. And because when you spoke about your son, I saw something I've been missing. Real purpose. Thomas nodded, understanding completely. I'll call you, Victoria said as he stepped into the elevator. About another outing. I'd like that, Thomas replied. A goodbye, Victoria. Goodbye, Thomas. As the elevator doors closed, Thomas caught a final glimpse of Victoria Reynolds turning toward her son's room, squaring her shoulders as if preparing for the most important meeting of her career. In a way, Thomas thought it was. Monday morning dawned, with the familiar rhythm of Victoria's executive routine, her alarm at 5 a.m., the pre-dawn workout with her personal trainer, the carefully prepared breakfast while reviewing overnight emails from international offices. But as she sipped her coffee, Her eyes kept drifting to the robot sitting on the kitchen counter. She and Lucas had spent all of Sunday building it together. The process had been frustrating at times. Victoria was accustomed to delegating technical tasks, not performing them, but Lucas's patience and unexpected expertise had guided them through. When the small mechanized figure finally took its first jerky steps across the counter, Lucas had cheered with pure joy, and Victoria had felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The simple pleasure of creating something with her own hands alongside her son. Now, as she prepared for her first meeting of the day, Victoria found herself reluctant to leave the penthouse. Lucas would be up soon, getting ready for school. Usually, she was gone before he woke, leaving notes with Elena about after-school activities and dinner plans. Making a sudden decision, Victoria sent a message to her assistant, reschedule 8 a.m. meeting to 9:30. We'll be arriving late today. 20 minutes later, Lucas shuffled into the kitchen in his pajamas, stopping short when he saw his mother still at the counter. "Mom, aren't you supposed to be at work?" Victoria smiled, pushing a plate of toast toward him. "Good morning to you too. I thought I'd have breakfast with you before school." Lucas looked at her suspiciously as he climbed onto a stool. "And are you sick?" The question stung, but Victoria forced herself to maintain her smile. "No, just rearranging my schedule a bit. I thought maybe I could drop you off at school today." Lucas's eyes widened. "Really? But what about your driver? He can take the day off," Victoria replied, pouring a glass of orange juice for her son. "It's not far to your school." As they ate breakfast together, something Victoria realized they hadn't done in months, Lucas gradually relaxed, telling her about a science project due the following week and a book he was reading. "Maybe we can stop at the bookstore after school," Victoria suggested. "Pick up some more books about robots or space." Lucas nodded enthusiastically, then paused. But don't you have meetings and stuff?" "I do," Victoria acknowledged. "But I'm the CEO. Sometimes I get to decide when those meetings happen." The drive to Lucas's school was a revelation. Victoria had visited the campus for occasional parent-teacher conferences and performances, but she'd never been part of the daily drop-off routine. Cars lined the circular driveway, parents waving to each other with familiar ease, children darting between vehicles with backpacks and lunchboxes. "That's Mrs. Bennett," Lucas pointed out as they waited in the queue. "She's Zach's mom. She volunteers in the library every Tuesday." Victoria watched a woman in casual clothes greeting children by name as they entered the building. "Do many parents volunteer?" "Yeah, lots," Lucas replied. Especially for field trips and stuff." Another piece of her son's life Victoria knew nothing about. How many field trips had he gone on with other parents while she was in board meetings? How many school events had she missed, sending Elena in her place? When they reached the drop-off point, Lucas hesitated before opening the car door. "Thanks for driving me, Mom." "My pleasure," Victoria said, meaning it. On impulse, she leaned over and gave him a quick hug. "Have a great day at school." Lucas smiled, a real, uncomplicated smile that transformed his serious little face, before jumping out of the car and joining the stream of children entering the building. Victoria watched until he disappeared inside, a strange hollow feeling expanding in her chest. Then she picked up her phone and called her assistant. "Cancel my Thursday afternoon meetings," she instructed, "and find out who coordinates parent volunteers at Lucas's school. I want to be added to the list." The Reynolds Industries executive floor was abuzz with subtle tension when Victoria arrived. Her rescheduled morning had created a ripple effect throughout the day's calendar, and the change in routine had people on edge. "Ms. Reynolds, the board members are waiting in the conference room," her assistant reported, hurrying alongside her as Victoria strode down the hallway. "And Tokyo is requesting a video call at noon instead of 2 p.m. "Tell Tokyo we'll stick to the original schedule," Victoria replied, not breaking stride, and informed the board, "I'll be 5 minutes late. I need to make a call first." In her office, Victoria closed the door and pulled out the business card Thomas Reeves had given her the previous day. His personal number was written on the back in neat, precise handwriting. She hesitated, her finger hovering over the call button. What exactly was she doing? Befriending a janitor, seeking parenting advice from a stranger. The Victoria Reynolds of last week would have scoffed at the very idea, but the Victoria Reynolds of today couldn't forget the look on Lucas's face as he built robots with Thomas. or the easy way conversation had flowed between them, so different from the stilted, careful interactions she usually had with her son. She pressed call. Thomas answered on the third ring, his voice cautious. "Miss Reynolds." "Victoria," she reminded him. "Do you have lunch plans today?" No," Thomas replied, clearly caught off guard. "I'm on shift from 10 p.m. tonight." "Good. Meet me at Bellini's at 1 p.m., Victoria said, naming an upscale restaurant near Reynolds Tower. "I have a proposition for you." Before Thomas could respond, she ended the call and straightened her jacket, mentally shifting into CEO mode for her board meeting. But the knowledge of her lunch appointment lingered at the edges of her mind, a reminder that something fundamental had shifted in her carefully controlled world. Bellini's was Victoria's regular lunch spot, where the maître d' knew to save her preferred corner table and the chef prepared her usual salad without being asked. Today, however, she had requested a more private table in the back, away from the business crowd that frequented the restaurant. Thomas arrived precisely at 1 p.m., looking uncomfortable in khaki pants and a button-down shirt that had seen better days. Victoria noted how out of place he appeared among the suits and designer dresses of the other patrons, yet he carried himself with quiet dignity. "Thank you for coming," Victoria said, as he took a seat across from her. "Your invitation was unexpected," Thomas replied, carefully unfolding his napkin. Victoria signaled the waiter to bring water, then leaned forward slightly. "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday. And you were right," Victoria admitted. "About time, about priorities, about Lucas." Thomas remained silent, allowing her to continue. "I took Lucas to school this morning," she said. "We had breakfast together first. It was nice." "I'm glad to hear it," Thomas said sincerely. "Bun, he seemed surprised," Victoria continued, a note of pain entering her voice. "Like it was a special occasion instead of something ordinary." Thomas nodded, understanding. Children adapt to what they expect. If attention is rare, they treat it as exceptional when it happens. Victoria took a sip of water, gathering her thoughts. "I've made some changes to my schedule. Small ones, for now. Shifting meetings, delegating more to my executive team. I'm going to volunteer at his school." "That's a good start," Thomas affirmed. "But it's not enough," Victoria said decisively, "which is why I wanted to meet with you today." The waiter arrived to take their orders. Victoria requested her usual salad, while Thomas opted for a simple pasta dish, clearly choosing one of the less expensive items on the menu. When they were alone again, Victoria continued. "Lucas mentioned you were a teacher before your son's illness." "Fifth grade science," Thomas confirmed, "for 8 years. And now you're cleaning floors at night," Victoria stated, no judgment in her tone. Thomas met her gaze evenly. "The medical bills wiped out my savings. The night shift pays more, and the building is quiet. It gives me time to think." "What if you could do both?" Victoria asked. "Teach and keep the night job, if you want it." Thomas frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "Lucas needs a tutor," Victoria explained. "Someone who can help with his schoolwork, but also engage with his interests. Science, robotics, space. Someone he connects with." Understanding dawned on Thomas's face. "You're offering me a job, 3 afternoons a week, from when school ends until I get home," Victoria specified. "You'd pick him up from school, help with homework, work on projects together. I'd pay you, of course, significantly more than you'd make teaching in the public school system." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "And what about you? Where will you be during these afternoons?" "Working," Victoria answered honestly. But I'm implementing other changes too. I'll be home for dinner those days, no matter what. And weekends will be family time, non-negotiable." "You're serious about this?" Thomas observed. "Completely," Victoria confirmed. "Lucas needs someone in his life who understands him, who can nurture his interests. I'm learning, but I have a lot of catching up to do." The waiter returned with their food, and they paused their conversation. Victoria watched as Thomas carefully considered her offer, his emotions playing across his face. "I have conditions," he said finally. Victoria nodded, unsurprised. "I expected you would." "I'm listening," Victoria said, folding her hands on the table. She had anticipated demands for higher pay, specific hours, perhaps even benefits. What Thomas said next surprised her. First, I don't want to replace you in Lucas's life, he began. My role would be supportive, not substitutive. You need to be increasingly present, not less. Victoria nodded slowly, agreed. Second, my involvement needs to be transparent. Lucas should understand exactly what my role is. Not a replacement parent, not a friend pretending to care, but someone who is there to help him learn and grow. Of course, Victoria said. Third, Thomas continued, his voice softening slightly, I want the option to step back if it becomes too difficult. Victoria understood immediately what he meant. If being with Lucas became too painful a reminder of Michael. That's fair, she acknowledged. We could start with a trial period of 1 month, then reassess. Thomas seemed to relax slightly. One more thing. If I'm going to tutor Lucas in science and robotics, I'll need proper materials, the kinds of things I used to have in my classroom. Victoria smiled for the first time since they'd sat down. Mr. Reeves, I run a multinational corporation with an entire division dedicated to advanced robotics and technology. I think we can manage some educational supplies. Thomas returned her smile, albeit tentatively. In that case, I accept your offer. Victoria extended her hand across the table, and Thomas shook it, a business agreement sealed, but one unlike any other in her corporate career. When can you start? She asked. Tomorrow, if you'd like, Thomas replied. I just need the details of Lucas's school and to be added to the approved pickup list. Victoria made a note on her phone. I'll have my assistant handle it this afternoon. We should also arrange for you to meet Lucas's teachers, get copies of his curriculum. As they continued discussing logistics over lunch, Victoria was struck by how differently Thomas approached education compared to the expensive private tutors she had occasionally hired in the past. Those professionals had focused on grades and measurable outcomes. Thomas spoke of curiosity, discovery, and finding joy in learning. But Lucas mentioned you two might visit the planetarium, Thomas said, as they finished their meals. That would be an excellent starting point for some astronomy projects. We're going this weekend, Victoria confirmed. He wants to learn more about constellations. If he's interested, we could build a simple telescope together, Thomas suggested. And there are some excellent kits available that teach the basics of optics while creating a functional instrument. Victoria felt a twinge of something unfamiliar, not jealousy exactly, but perhaps a sense of being outpaced. This man knew instinctively how to connect with her son in ways she was only beginning to discover. Mr. Reeves, Thomas, she corrected herself. May I ask you something personal? He nodded cautiously. How did you learn to be such a good father? Was it natural for you, or did you have to work at it? Thomas's expression softened with remembrance. It didn't come naturally at all. I made countless mistakes with Michael. I was too strict sometimes, too distracted others. What made the difference was being present, truly present, not just physically in the room. That's the part I struggle with, Victoria admitted. Even when I'm home, my mind is often still at the office. It takes practice, Thomas assured her, and just like any other skill worth mastering. As they parted ways outside the restaurant, Victoria felt a strange mix of emotions: hope for the changes she was implementing, anxiety about whether they would be enough, and an unfamiliar vulnerability in having admitted her parenting weaknesses to someone who had once been just another employee in her building. I'll see you tomorrow, Thomas said, extending his hand again. Victoria shook it firmly. Tomorrow. The next afternoon found Victoria distracted during her executive team meeting. Her phone sat on the conference table, screen up, something she normally never allowed herself. At precisely 3:15 p.m., it lit up with a text message. Pickup successful. Heading to the Natural History Museum to research dinosaurs for his science project. Attached was a photo of Lucas grinning widely, backpack slung over his shoulder, standing in front of the museum entrance. Ms. Reynolds, your thoughts on the Asian market expansion? Victoria looked up to find her entire executive team watching her expectantly. In the past, she would have delivered a flawless analysis, having prepared extensively and focused entirely on the business at hand. Today, she hesitated. I believe we should proceed cautiously, she began. regaining her composure. The projections are promising, but I'd like a more detailed risk assessment before committing resources. Johnson, can your team prepare that for our next meeting? Her CFO nodded, making a note. And now, if you'll excuse me, Victoria continued, standing up, I need to step out for a moment. In the privacy of her office, Victoria looked again at the photo of Lucas. There was an openness to his expression that she rarely saw at home, an unguarded joy. She typed a quick reply, excellent choice. Looking forward to hearing all about it at dinner. Then, in a decision that would have been unthinkable a week ago, she returned to the conference room and announced, we'll need to conclude by 5 p.m. today. I have a family commitment this evening. The subtle exchanged glances among her executives didn't escape her notice, but Victoria found she didn't care. For years, she had cultivated an image of unwavering dedication to Reynolds Enterprises, of placing the company above all else. That image had served her well in the corporate world, but at what cost to her relationship with Lucas? At 5:30 p.m., Victoria walked into her penthouse to find Thomas and Lucas at the dining table, surrounded by dinosaur models, books, and Lucas's half-completed science project. Mom, Lucas exclaimed, genuinely surprised to see her. You're home early. I promised I would be, Victoria reminded him, setting down her briefcase and joining them at the table. Show me what you're working on. For the next half hour, Lucas enthusiastically explained his project, a diorama showing different dinosaurs in their natural habitats, complete with research cards detailing their diets, behaviors, and eventual extinction. Mr. Reeves helped me find really cool facts that most kids won't know, Lucas said proudly, like how some dinosaurs might have been warm-blooded and how birds are actually living dinosaurs. Victoria listened attentively, asking questions and marveling at her son's knowledge. Occasionally, her eyes met Thomas's across the table, and she saw approval in his gaze that meant more to her than she cared to admit. When it was time for Thomas to leave, Lucas gave him a quick hug. See you tomorrow, Mr. Reeves. Looking forward to it, Lucas, Thomas replied warmly. Don't forget to finish that reading on plate tectonics for tomorrow. At the elevator, Victoria walked Thomas out while Lucas continued working on his project. Thank you, she said simply. He seems happy. He is, Thomas confirmed. He's a bright kid, Victoria. He just needs the right kind of attention. The kind I haven't been giving him, she acknowledged, the words still difficult to say aloud. Thomas shook his head. Don't dwell on what's past. Focus on what you're changing now. As the elevator doors closed, Victoria returned to the dining table, where Lucas was carefully gluing a miniature palm tree into his prehistoric landscape. Need some help? She offered, pulling up a chair beside him. Lucas looked up in surprise. Don't you have work to do? Nothing that can't wait, Victoria replied, picking up a small dinosaur figure. This is more important right now. The smile that spread across Lucas's face was worth every email she wasn't answering, every report she wasn't reviewing, every call she wasn't taking. Later that night, after Lucas had gone to bed, Victoria sat in her home office, catching up on the work she'd postponed. Her phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. You did well today. Consistency is key. See you tomorrow. The simple message felt like validation from an unexpected source. Victoria Reynolds, who ran a company with thousands of employees worldwide, found herself strangely pleased by the approval of a night janitor who had somehow become an essential part of her family's new reality. She typed back a reply, thank you for everything. Then she closed her laptop, turned off the lights, and went to check on her sleeping son, something she hadn't done in longer than she cared to remember. Over the next 3 weeks, a new rhythm established itself in the Reynolds household. 3 afternoons a week, Thomas picked Lucas up from school and spent the afternoon engaged in learning that rarely resembled traditional tutoring. They built volcano models on the kitchen counter, programmed simple games on Lucas's tablet, and filled a corner of the boys' room with ongoing science projects. Victoria, true to her word, arrived home by 6 p.m. on those days, joining them for dinner and listening to Lucas's animated descriptions of their activities. The other 2 weekdays, Elena still cared for Lucas after school, but Victoria made a point of calling him each afternoon, a brief check-in that meant more to her son than she had expected. Weekends became sacred family time. Victoria declined business trips, ignored non-emergency calls, and focused entirely on rebuilding her relationship with Lucas. They visited museums, went to the movies, and spent a memorable Saturday attempting to bake cookies from scratch, an endeavor that ended with flour-covered countertops and slightly burnt but triumphantly homemade treats. The changes hadn't come without cost. Victoria's executive team had adjusted to her new boundaries with varying degrees of acceptance. Some supported her efforts to balance work and family, while others questioned her commitment to the company behind closed doors. Market analysts had noted her reduced public presence, spawning speculation about her future at Reynolds Enterprises. Victoria was aware of the whispers, the concerns, the predictions of her inevitable burnout or resignation. In moments of doubt, usually late at night when the penthouse was quiet, she questioned her new path. Was she jeopardizing everything she'd built? Would the board eventually lose confidence in her leadership? But then morning would come, and Lucas would emerge from his bedroom smiling, chatting about his dreams or plans for the day, and the doubts would recede. The wall that had existed between them was gradually crumbling, replaced by something warm and genuine that Victoria had never expected to feel, the simple joy of being a mother. One Thursday afternoon, Victoria left the office earlier than usual. She hadn't told Thomas or Lucas she was coming home, wanting to surprise them. As the elevator ascended to the penthouse, Victoria found herself looking forward to seeing what project they might be working on today. The doors opened and she stepped into unexpected silence. The penthouse appeared empty. Victoria set down her briefcase, a flicker of alarm rising in her chest. "Lucas," she called. "Thomas?" No answer. She pulled out her phone to call Thomas when she noticed the sliding glass door to the terrace was partially open. Moving quietly, Victoria approached and peered outside. Thomas and Lucas sat on the terrace floor, surrounded by papers and what appeared to be electrical components. Between them was a small telescope on a makeshift mount. They were so engrossed in their work that neither had heard her enter. "The important thing is to make sure the primary mirror is perfectly aligned," Thomas was explaining, his hands gently guiding Lucas's as they adjusted something inside the telescope tube. "Even a tiny misalignment will distort the image. Like when I wore Jeremy's glasses at school and everything got all blurry?" Lucas asked. Thomas chuckled. "Exactly like that. Optics are all about precision." Victoria watched silently, struck by the tableau before her. Lucas was leaning into Thomas's guidance without the slightest hesitation, his face intent with concentration. There was an ease between them that Victoria had rarely seen her son display with adults, an implicit trust. For a moment, an uncomfortable feeling stirred in her chest. Was it jealousy, concern, the realization that someone else had connected with her son in ways she was still struggling to achieve? But as she continued watching, the feeling transformed into something else: gratitude. This man, who had suffered his own unimaginable loss, was helping her son flourish. He wasn't replacing her, he was filling a gap while she learned to be the parent Lucas needed. Victoria stepped onto the terrace. What are you two building out here?" Both turned in surprise. Lucas's face lit up. "Mom, you're home early. I thought I'd surprise you," Victoria explained, moving closer to examine their project. "Is this the telescope you mentioned?" Thomas nodded, standing to greet her. "Lucas had the idea to observe the lunar eclipse next week. We're modifying this basic model to improve the resolution." "Can we watch it from here, Mom?" Lucas asked eagerly. "Mr. Reeves says we'll have a perfect view from our terrace, since it's so high up." "Of course," Victoria agreed. "We could make an event of it, stay up late, have hot chocolate." "Could Mr. Reeves come too?" Lucas asked, glancing between the adults. "He knows all the moon stuff, like where the best craters are and everything." Victoria met Thomas's gaze. They had maintained clear boundaries since establishing their arrangement. Thomas worked with Lucas during designated hours, then returned to his life. They hadn't discussed extending his role into family activities. "If Mr. Reeves is available and would like to join us, he'd be welcome," Victoria said carefully. Thomas seemed to understand her hesitation. "That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to intrude on family time." "Please," Lucas pressed. "It won't be the same without you explaining everything." Victoria recognized the genuine desire in her son's voice. "It's not an intrusion if you're invited," she said to Thomas. "We'd both like you to join us if you can." Thomas considered for a moment, then nodded. "I'd be honored, thank you." Lucas grinned triumphantly before turning back to the telescope. "We need to finish calibrating the finder scope. Want to help, Mom? I'm not sure I'd be much use," Victoria admitted. "I don't know the first thing about telescopes." "I didn't either until today," Lucas assured her. "Mr. Reeves is a really good teacher." Thomas moved aside, creating space for Victoria to join them on the terrace floor. "Lucas is being generous. He's a natural at this." Feeling slightly self-conscious, Victoria slipped off her heels and sat cross-legged beside her son, who immediately began explaining what they'd accomplished so far. His confidence as he described complex concepts she barely understood both surprised and delighted her. Thomas occasionally interjected to clarify technical details, but mostly he observed, letting Lucas take the lead in teaching his mother. Victoria noticed the subtle pedagogical skill in this approach. Thomas wasn't just educating Lucas, he was helping him develop the ability to communicate his knowledge. As the afternoon light began to fade, Victoria realized she was genuinely enjoying herself. Her phone had buzzed several times in her pocket, but for once, she felt no urgency to check it. "We should probably head inside," Thomas suggested, noting the dropping temperature. "As we can finish the adjustments tomorrow." As they gathered their materials, Victoria's phone rang with her CFO's direct line, a call she would normally never ignore. She glanced at the screen, then at Lucas, who was carefully collecting small screws in a plastic container. "Go ahead," Thomas said quietly. "We've got this." Victoria stepped to the edge of the terrace to take the call. "Johnson, this needs to be quick. I'm in the middle of something. The Shanghai deal is falling apart," her CFO reported tensely. "Lee is threatening to walk unless you personally join the call in 15 minutes. 6 weeks ago, Victoria would have immediately returned to the office, regardless of the hour or previous commitments. The Shanghai expansion was crucial to their 5-year growth strategy, a deal she had personally cultivated for months. "Set up the video conference in my home office," she instructed instead. "I'll take the call from here." "Victoria, I really think—" "My home office, Johnson, 15 minutes. She ended the call and turned back to find Thomas and Lucas watching her, Lucas's expression already shifting to the resigned disappointment she knew too well. "You have to go to work, don't you?" he asked, his voice flat. Victoria shook her head. "No, I'm staying right here. I have an important call to take in my office, but it won't take more than an hour. Then we can have dinner together as planned." Lucas's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Really? You're not leaving?" "Really," Victoria confirmed. "Now, help Mr. Reeves bring all this inside while I change, and then maybe you can tell me what you'd like for dinner." As Lucas and Thomas carried the telescope components into the penthouse, Victoria caught Thomas's approving nod. That small gesture of validation meant more to her than she would have expected, reinforcing that she was making the right choice. Not the easy one, but the right one. The video call with Mr. Lee and the Shanghai investors was tense, as expected. Victoria navigated the delicate negotiations from her home office, conscious of Lucas and Thomas setting the dining table just outside her door. Twice, she heard Lucas laugh, a sound that used to be rare in their home. When Mr. Lee demanded concessions that would have jeopardized Reynolds Enterprises' position, Victoria found herself unusually calm. "And do I understand your concerns?" she told him, "but I cannot commit to terms that undervalue what we bring to this partnership. We can reconvene tomorrow to discuss alternatives, but these specific demands are non-negotiable." It was a risky stance, one that could potentially end months of careful diplomacy. But as Victoria ended the call an hour later, she felt an unexpected sense of clarity. The Shanghai deal was important, but not at any cost. Some boundaries were worth maintaining, both in business and in life. When she emerged from her office, Lucas looked up anxiously. "Is everything okay with your work?" "Everything is fine," Victoria assured him, joining them at the table where Thomas had helped Lucas prepare a simple meal of pasta and salad. "Now, tell me more about this lunar eclipse we're planning to watch." The night of the lunar eclipse arrived with perfect weather, clear skies, mild temperature, and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of the potted lavender Victoria had recently added to the terrace. She'd left the office at 4 p.m., ignoring the raised eyebrows of her executive team to prepare for the evening. Lucas had spent the afternoon with Thomas, finalizing adjustments to the telescope and preparing an information sheet about the eclipse, complete with hand-drawn diagrams showing the alignment of the Earth, Moon, and Sun. Victoria had ordered food from Lucas's favorite restaurant, and now the three of them sat on the terrace, surrounded by comfortable cushions and blankets, waiting for the celestial event to begin. "Ah, how long until it starts?" Lucas asked, peering through the telescope at the full moon that hung bright and untouched in the night sky. Thomas checked his watch. "About 20 minutes until we see the first shadow. The total eclipse won't be for another hour and a half." "Will it really turn red?" Lucas asked, his excitement palpable. "Like copper," Thomas confirmed. "Oh, that's why they're sometimes called blood moon. The Earth's atmosphere filters the sunlight that reaches the moon during the eclipse, letting through mostly red wavelengths." Victoria watched her son's face in the soft light from the lanterns she'd arranged around the terrace. The wonder in his expression reminded her of her own childhood fascination with the night sky, a memory so distant she had almost forgotten it. "I used to stargaze with my father," she said suddenly, surprising herself with the admission. "Before Reynolds Enterprises became so successful. We had a little house in Connecticut with a yard. He bought a second-hand telescope from a colleague, and we'd spend Saturday nights mapping constellations." Lucas turned to her in surprise. "Grandpa liked space too. He loved it," Victoria confirmed, smiling at the memory. He used to say that looking at the stars gave him perspective, that no business problem seemed quite so overwhelming when you considered the vastness of the universe. "Is that why there's a telescope in the storage closet?" Lucas asked. "I found it once when I was looking for my old train set." Victoria blinked in surprise. "It's here. I thought it was lost in the move years ago." Lucas nodded. "It's in a big black case with stickers on it. That's my father's telescope," Victoria confirmed, a wave of emotion washing over her. "I can't believe it's been here all this time." Thomas watched the exchange with quiet interest. "Perhaps we could restore," he suggested. "Older telescopes often have excellent optics. They just need a bit of care." "Could we?" Lucas asked eagerly. "Then we'd have 2 telescopes." Victoria nodded, touched by her son's enthusiasm. "I'd like that very much." As they turned their attention back to the night sky, Victoria found herself reflecting on the parallels. Her father had built Reynolds Enterprises from a modest technology firm into a regional success, dedicating increasingly long hours to the business as it grew. The stargazing sessions had gradually become less frequent, then stopped altogether. By the time Victoria was Lucas's age, her father was largely absent, consumed by work. She had followed the same path without question, assuming it was the natural order of things. Success required sacrifice, and family would understand. Now, watching Lucas excitedly check the telescope alignment while Thomas explained the phases of the eclipse, Victoria wondered what else her father had missed and what he might have changed if given another chance. "It's starting!" Lucas exclaimed, pointing to the faint shadow beginning to creep across the moon's bright surface. The three of them took turns at the telescope, watching as the Earth's shadow gradually consumed the moon. Between observations, they ate dinner and sipped hot chocolate, while Thomas shared facts about lunar geography and tidal forces. Lucas absorbed every word, occasionally asking questions that revealed a depth of understanding beyond his years. "You know," Thomas said during a lull in the conversation, "the ancient Greeks figured out that the Earth was round by observing lunar eclipses. The shadow on the moon is always curved, which could only happen if the Earth was a sphere." "That's so cool," Lucas marveled. "They figured that out thousands of years ago just by watching carefully." "Observation is the foundation of all science," Thomas agreed, looking closely at the world around us and asking questions about what we see. Victoria watched her son as he processed this idea. "Is that why you like science so much, Lucas?" "The questions," he nodded thoughtfully. "I like that there's always more to learn. Like, we know how the eclipse works, but it's still amazing to actually see it happen." As the eclipse reached totality, the moon transformed into a deep, rusty red disk suspended in the darkness. Lucas gasped at the sight, and even Victoria found herself moved by the celestial display. "It's beautiful," she murmured. And to think, people have been watching this same phenomenon for thousands of years, Thomas added. There's something humbling about that. Lucas looked up from the telescope. Mum, did you and Grandpa ever see a lunar eclipse together? Once, Victoria recalled, the memory returning with unexpected clarity. I was about 7. We stayed up late on a school night, which felt terribly exciting. He told me stories about ancient civilizations that believed the moon was being eaten by a dragon. What happened to him? Thomas asked quietly. Your father? Victoria hesitated, aware that Lucas was listening intently. She rarely spoke of her father's final years. Even with close associate, he worked too hard for too long, she said finally. Stress, poor diet, not enough rest. He had a heart attack at his desk when I was in college. The doctor said his body had been warning him for years, but he never slowed down. The implications of her words hung in the night air. Thomas's gaze was understanding, but uncompromising. He recognized the pattern she was repeating, the legacy she had unconsciously adopted. Lucas's small hand found hers in the darkness. I'm glad you're slowing down, Mom, he said simply. Victoria squeezed his hand, unable to speak past the sudden tightness in her throat. This child, who had been watching and understanding far more than she had realized, had articulated exactly what she needed to hear. The three of them sat in comfortable silence as the eclipse slowly began to reverse. The moon gradually emerging from the Earth's shadow. Lucas eventually dozed off, wrapped in blankets between Victoria and Thomas. I should probably go, Thomas said softly, checking his watch. It's getting late. Victoria nodded, but made no move to wake Lucas. Thank you for tonight. For all of this, really. You're doing the hard part, Thomas replied. Changing established patterns isn't easy. Neither is facing grief every day, Victoria observed. Being with Lucas must bring back difficult memory. Thomas gazed at the sleeping boy. It does, he admitted, but it's also healing in ways I didn't expect. When Michael first died, I couldn't bear to be around children. Now, it feels like honoring him somehow. Victoria studied Thomas's face in the gentle light. In the weeks since he had entered their lives, she had come to respect him deeply, not just for his kindness toward Lucas, but for his integrity, his patience, and his quiet wisdom. The month is almost up, she said. Our trial period, Thomas nodded. I've been thinking about that. And I'd like to continue if you're willing, he said. Lucas is thriving, and I found purpose again. I'm glad, Victoria said sincerely. Lucas would be devastated if you left. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by Lucas's soft breathing and the distant sounds of the city far below. May I ask you something personal? Thomas ventured after a moment. Victoria nodded, curious. What made you listen to me that day? When I stopped you outside the building, you could have had me fired or simply ignored me. Victoria considered the question carefully. Something in your eye, she said finally. You weren't angry or judgmental. You were desperate, but not for yourself, for Lucas. It was the look of someone who understood what was at stake. Thomas nodded slowly. Time, he said softly, the one thing we can never get back. I almost missed my chance, Victoria admitted, looking down at her sleeping son. If you hadn't intervened, but you didn't miss it, Thomas reminded her. That's what matters now. As the moon returned to its full brightness, Thomas gathered his things and prepared to leave. Victoria remained on the terrace with Lucas, who had curled against her side, his face peaceful in sleep. Same time tomorrow? Thomas asked at the elevator. Actually, Victoria said, I was thinking of taking the day off tomorrow. Lucas doesn't have school. Teacher in service day. Perhaps we could all visit the Air and Space Museum. Lucas has been talking about their new Mars rover exhibit. Thomas smiled, genuine warmth reaching his eyes. I'd like that. Should I meet you there? Why don't you join us for breakfast first? Victoria suggested. We can start the day together. As the elevator doors closed, Victoria carried her sleeping son to his bedroom, carefully tucking him into bed without waking him. She stood watching him for a moment, thinking about time, how quickly it passed, how precious each moment was, how easily it could slip away while you were focused on other things. Her father had built a company, but missed his daughter's childhood. She had nearly made the same mistake with Lucas. Not anymore, she whispered, gently brushing the hair from his forehead. I promise. 6 months later, Victoria Reynolds stood at the podium in the grand ballroom of the Westfield Hotel, surveying the crowd of journalists, business leaders, and philanthropists gathered for the launch of the Reynolds Foundation for Children's Education. Camera flashes periodically lit up the room as photographers captured the event for tomorrow's business pages. Thank you all for being here today," Victoria began, her voice steady and confident. "For those who have followed Reynolds Enterprises over the years, this announcement may come as a surprise. We've built our reputation on technological innovation and market disruption. Today, however, we're expanding our vision to include what I believe is the most important investment of all, our children's future." She paused, her gaze finding Lucas in the front row, sitting between Thomas and Eleanor. Her son gave her a thumbs up, his smile encouraging. Beside him, Thomas nodded slightly, his quiet support evident even from across the room. The Reynolds Foundation will partner with public schools throughout the country to provide STEM education resources, focusing particularly on underserved communities. We'll be developing interactive curricula, funding teacher training, and creating accessible technology programs for students from kindergarten through high school. As Victoria outlined the Foundation's ambitious goals, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The past 6 months had transformed not just her relationship with Lucas, but her entire approach to leadership. She had restructured her executive team, delegating day-to-day operations to her trusted COO and focusing her own attention on strategic vision and corporate culture. She had implemented family-friendly policies throughout Reynolds Enterprises, including flexible hours, expanded parental leave, and an on-site childcare center. Changes that had initially raised concerns about costs, but ultimately improved employee retention and productivity. Most significantly, she had begun re-evaluating what success truly meant, both professionally and personally. This foundation represents more than just corporate social responsibility, Victoria continued. It's born from a profound personal realization that our greatest legacy isn't measured in market share or profit margins, but in the lives we touch and the future we help create. Her gaze returned to Lucas, who was listening with uncharacteristic attentiveness. At 8, almost 9 now, he still preferred dinosaurs and robots to speeches, but today he understood the significance of the moment. "I'd like to acknowledge someone whose vision and dedication were instrumental in bringing this foundation to life," Victoria said, deviating slightly from her prepared remarks. "Thomas Reeves, would you please join me on stage?" A murmur of interest rippled through the audience as Thomas, looking startled and slightly uncomfortable in the suit Victoria had insisted on having tailored for him, made his way to the podium. "Many of you don't know Mr. Reeves," Victoria said as he joined her. "6 months ago, I didn't really know him either, despite the fact that he worked in my building. He was a 5th-grade science teacher for 8 years before personal circumstances led him to take a different path. His passion for education and his understanding of what children truly need to thrive have shaped every aspect of this foundation." Thomas stood beside her, his expression a mixture of embarrassment and pride. "Mr. Reeves will be serving as the Foundation's educational director, bringing his expertise and vision to programs that will reach thousands of children nationwide. I can think of no one better qualified to lead this initiative." The announcement was met with applause, led enthusiastically by Lucas. Thomas and Victoria had discussed the position extensively over the previous months. He would continue his evening work at Reynolds Tower, his choice, not Victoria's, but would dedicate his days to developing the Foundation's educational approach. As Victoria concluded her speech and the formal reception began, she found herself surrounded by well-wishers and potential partners eager to associate themselves with the high-profile initiative. She navigated the conversations with practiced ease, but her attention remained anchored to Lucas, who was now proudly showing Thomas's former principal, a special guest at the event, the prototype educational tablet they had been developing. "Ms. Reynolds," a voice interrupted her thoughts. "Eliza Chen, Business Today. May I ask you a few questions? Victoria recognized the reporter from previous press events. Of course, Miss Chen. Though I should warn you, most of the details are in the press packet. I'm actually more interested in the personal angle, the journalist replied, her gaze sharp and assessing. This foundation represents a significant departure from your usual business strategy. Some industry analysts are suggesting it signals a shift in your priorities, perhaps even a step toward eventual retirement. Victoria smiled, unsurprised by the speculation. Boy, I have no plans to retire, Mrs. Chen. What I do have is a new perspective on what leadership means. Sometimes it takes a significant wake-up call to realize when your definition of success has become too narrow. And what was your wake-up call, if I may ask? Victoria's eyes found Thomas across the room, now deep in conversation with the education commissioner. Then Lucas, who had discovered the dessert table and was methodically selecting cookies with the same focus he applied to scientific experiments. Let's just say, I was fortunate enough to receive some excellent advice before it was too late, she replied diplomatically. Now, if you'll excuse me, I see someone I need to speak with. She made her way through the crowd to Lucas, who looked up guiltily with a chocolate cookie halfway to his mouth. Hi, Mom. Your speech was really good. Thank you, sweetheart. Are you enjoying the party? Lucas shrugged. It's okay. When can we go home and finish our rocket model? Victoria laughed, checking her watch. Another hour, I promise. Then rockets and maybe a movie. Deal, Lucas agreed, his expression brightening. Can Mr. Reeves come too? We're at a tricky part with the fuel chamber design. I'm sure he can, Victoria nodded. Why don't you go ask him? As Lucas darted off through the crowd, Victoria found herself momentarily alone, a rare occurrence at such events. She took the opportunity to survey the room, observing the fruits of her vision taking shape around her. The Reynolds Foundation was more than just a charitable endeavor or a public relations exercise. It represented a recalibration of values that had been long overdue in her company, in her life, and in her heart. 6 months ago, she would have considered this event solely in terms of its business impact. The connections made, the partnerships secured, the positive press generated. Today, while those elements still mattered, they were secondary to the Foundation's true purpose, creating opportunities for children like Lucas to explore, discover, and grow, and for parents like herself to recognize what truly mattered before it was too late. Across the room, she caught Thomas's eye. He gave her a subtle nod of approval that had become familiar over the months of their evolving relationship. They weren't friends exactly. The boundaries of employer and employee remained, but they had developed a mutual respect and understanding that transcended conventional categories. Ms. Reynolds, her assistant, appeared at her elbow. The mayor would like a word before he leaves. Of course, Victoria replied, smoothly transitioning back into CEO mode. Indeed, tell him I'll be right there. Before moving away, she took one more moment to watch Lucas animatedly explaining something to Thomas, his hands gesturing in the air to illustrate some complex concept. Thomas was listening with his characteristic patience and attention, neither dismissing the boy's ideas nor patronizing him. Victoria remembered the desperate janitor who had intercepted her outside Reynolds Tower 6 months ago. The grief-stricken father who had seen in Lucas what she had been too busy to notice, a child who needed presence more than presence, attention more than achievements. Take my son for one day, she had agreed, never imagining how that single day would ripple outward, transforming not just her relationship with Lucas, but her entire understanding of success and fulfillment. Thomas's one condition, that she be present when he returned, had been simple yet profound. It had forced her to pause, to listen, to truly see her son perhaps for the first time in years. That moment of connection had been the first step on a path she had never anticipated, but now couldn't imagine not taking. As Victoria moved through the crowd toward the mayor, she carried with her the quiet certainty that she was finally building the right kind of legacy, not just for Reynolds Enterprises, but for Lucas and for herself. Later that evening, as promised, Victoria, Lucas, and Thomas gathered around the kitchen table in the Reynolds penthouse, the formal attire of the Foundation launch replaced by comfortable clothes, the polished speeches giving way to enthusiastic discussions about rocket propulsion and aerospace aerodynamics. But if we angle the fins like this, Lucas demonstrated, manipulating a piece of the model, it should stabilize during the initial ascent. That's good thinking, Thomas agreed. What do you think, Victoria? Victoria, who had been contentedly observing their interaction, smiled. I think my son is going to be an engineer someday. Or an astronaut, Lucas countered. Or maybe both. Both sounds perfect, Victoria agreed, reaching out to ruffle his hair, a gesture that would have been foreign to her 6 months ago, but now came naturally. As they continued working on the model, Victoria found herself reflecting on Thomas's words from that first day. Every child deserves to be someone's priority. Lucas was her priority now, not her only responsibility, but her most important one. The company still demanded her attention. The foundation needed her guidance, but her son required her presence. She had finally learned the difference. When the rocket model was complete, they moved to the living room for the promised movie. Lucas, still buzzing with excitement from the day's events, finally dozed off halfway through, his head resting against Victoria's shoulder. I should go, Thomas said quietly, rising from his seat. It's getting late. Victoria nodded, careful not to disturb Lucas. Thank you for today, for everything, really. Thomas paused at the elevator, looking back at mother and son on the sofa. You know, when I first approached you that day, I was thinking only of Lucas. I never imagined how much it would help me too. We've all been healing, Victoria acknowledged, but in different ways. As the elevator doors closed behind Thomas, Victoria gently lifted her sleeping son and carried him to his bedroom. The walls, once decorated with expensive but impersonal art chosen by an interior designer, were now covered with science posters, star charts, and Lucas's own drawings and projects. She tucked him in, then sat beside him for a moment, watching the peaceful rise and fall of his chest. The night janitor's desperate plea had changed everything, opening her eyes to what had been slipping away while she built her empire. One day, one condition, one second chance. Victoria leaned down and kissed her son's forehead. Sweet dreams. My priority, she whispered. Then she quietly left the room, leaving the door slightly ajar, the way Lucas liked it, with the soft glow of his galaxy nightlight casting gentle stars across the ceiling.